Neuroanatomy is a tough topic, but Visible Body has the interactive resources you need to study it without making your brain hurt. In this video, we'll show you how to use the functional regions of the cerebral cortex 3D model to explore all the amazing things the brain can do. You can access the functional areas of the cerebral cortex models using the search function or by highlighting a region of the cerebrum in a 3D view that includes the brain. There's one functional areas map for the left side of the brain and one for the right side. We're going to look at the left side model because it has some unique areas related to language. Let's look at the functional areas of each lobe of the brain, starting with the parietal lobe. Most of the functional areas in this lobe of the brain deal with sensory processing. Just posterior to the central sulcus, which we can note with the draw tool here, we find the left primary somatosensory cortex, which receives and processes sensory input from the right side of the body, including touch, position, pain, and temperature. Posterior to that is the secondary somatosensory cortex, whose main role is higher-level processing and integration of sensory input from the primary somatosensory cortex. Next is the somatosensory association area, which integrates this processed sensory input, producing perception and meaning. Now let's move to the frontal lobe, which is responsible for a ton of cognitive and motor abilities. The primary motor cortex is located anterior to the central sulcus and is associated with voluntary motor control, like typing on a keyboard. Anterior to the primary motor cortex are the supplementary motor area and premotor cortex, which plan movements. The prefrontal association area, or prefrontal cortex, makes up the most anterior part of the frontal lobe and is involved in executive function as well as cognition and personality. If you've heard of the famous Phineas Gage case from 1848, his prefrontal cortex was the part of the brain that was damaged, altering his personality. Broca's area in the inferior frontal gyrus, or IFG, usually on the left side of the brain, is primarily associated with speech production. Also part of the IFG is the gustatory cortex, which receives and processes taste information. Posteriorly, we have the occipital lobe. The functional areas of this lobe are responsible for visual processing. Each of the visual cortices has slightly different functions. The left primary visual cortex gets sensory input from the thalamus about the right visual field from both eyes. The secondary visual cortex receives input from the primary visual cortex and processes it into basic shapes and patterns. The tertiary visual cortex does higher-level processing and plays a role in object recognition and motion sensing. The visual association area extends from the occipital lobe into the parietal and temporal lobes. It integrates processed visual input with other sensory input and participates in object recognition as well as pattern recognition. Overall, the temporal lobe processes auditory and olfactory input. The primary auditory cortex receives auditory input and processes pitch and rhythm. The secondary auditory cortex further processes auditory information and is involved in the perception of speech. The auditory association area is another auditory processing region that interprets the meaning of sounds. Wernicke's area, located in the superior temporal gyrus, usually on the left side, is associated with the comprehension of spoken and written language. The primary olfactory cortex, or limbic association area, receives and processes olfaction signals. Lastly, let's turn the model around to see the limbic cortex, which is located on the medial surface of each cerebral hemisphere. This area processes olfactory information as well as emotion and memory, just in case you've ever wondered why smell and memory are so connected. And that wraps up our tour of the cerebral cortex. To learn even more about the brain and nervous system, check out Visible Body Suite at visiblebody.com/VBSuite.